Welcome back to Off Ball Takes. This is your host, Yarby and this is my co-host,
Christopher Walls.
We appreciate all the support on our recent content, and before we do get started, please don't forget to like and subscribe, and follow us on Instagram and TikTok at the OBT Podcast for more content and updates.
Yes, we're back at it again with another episode. We are live, not in our studio, but we are live together for an episode. And this time around, now we're going to talk a little bit more about the league now that we're a little further in than we were before, right? If you're watching this, it's probably Tuesday, Wednesday or so. So we're pretty much a full week into the season. Lots happened since then. First off, probably one of the main things we have to start with is we have some injuries that have kind of popped up around the league. So we did get a couple in the last few days since we've recorded. So you had Luka, right? So he's going to be out for at least a week or so with a sprained finger and then also a lower leg contusion, right? Where if you watch the Wolves game, right, he had 49 points.
Yeah.
Monster game against the Minnesota Timberwolves. Even got a tip dunk in there, basically. And then, we saw in the game he was grabbing at his hand. He still played through it. But then after that, right before their next game against the Sacramento Kings, right, it ended up being revealed that he's going to be out for at least a week. And they're in kind of a rough stretch because they have a lot of games in the span of a week, right? Because they had a back-to-back that they just played with the Kings and the Blazers. Then they have a couple games against Minnesota, game against Memphis, right? Minnesota, there's an injury that we're going to talk about momentarily. And then they have another back-to-back, right, to close it out. So kind of a rough part. But the first two games, you went 1-1, right? Because you had a 50-point game from Austin Reaves, right? Where Austin Reaves has 51 points, 11 rebounds, 9 assists, right? 22 free throw attempts, right? He's in a contract year. This is one of those guys where I remember last year we kind of said that we thought he was the best third option in the league, right? Didn't necessarily work out in the playoffs. I know he played through some injuries, right? But he is really showcasing that he's taken a leap this year, right? I mean, because already without LeBron, without Luka as well, right? So you're kind of compiling a ragtag group of guys together, and he's just basically playing pick and roll with DeAndre Ayton. He's able to take guys off the dribble, get to his spots, get to the step backs, get to the free throw line. So it's a really impressive skill all around game, especially on the offensive end, and they're going to need that. And he has been able to scale up many times over the last couple of seasons when guys are out, and they're going to need every bit of it, right? Because they're kind of in a rough stretch right now.
Yeah, and it's like you said, he's always kind of been that kind of guy, right? Like, always had a chip on his shoulder. Started off, undrafted pretty much, right? So, he's always worked his way up and definitely, I think, overplayed his projected role or whatever. So, yeah, and like you said, we talked about it. Best third option in the league last year, in our opinion. Definitely came up a little short in the playoffs. But, now is the perfect opportunity, right? No Luka, no LeBron. And I think he can carry the weight because elsewhere he'd probably be a number 2.
Yeah. And, just to kind of add on to those stats, right? Because I have them with me. They mentioned basically in terms of the guys that have gotten like 50 points and 10 rebounds in the Lakers. I mean, just some of the names, right? Like Kobe Bryant, LeBron James, Anthony Davis, Elgin Baylor, Jerry West, right? So Shaq, right? He's in company with a lot of, many guys that are all-time great players. So, obviously, not saying he's in that tier, but he's very good, right? And he's a guy that you have to actually take seriously because, like you said, he went from undrafted to now he's a star-level player, basically somewhere around that, right? Like he's a guy where don't know if he'll actually get it, but right now he's in the running to basically be in an all-star. I don't think he'll necessarily get in by the time guys come back. The stats will normalize a little bit, but just this is one of those reasons why people have kind of talked about the idea of, do you trade Austin Reaves for some type of guy that's probably a downgrade as a player, but maybe just a better fit? And it's kind of hard to make that case because he's just so individually talented. But it is tough to be able to say, can we realistically put together a team where you have those three guys, right? Can you fit defensive players around them? Can you get athletes? And it's going to be tricky because they have some guys that have played well individually, right? Like Aiden's played well.
Yeah.
Marcus Smart, right? But now they have got a bunch of guys that are hurt, right? They were down 7 players in their second game against the Blazers, and it did not go very well.
Right.
And, that's kind of how injuries are. With the next one, right, you have Anthony Edwards, right, where he's going to be out for at least a couple of weeks, right? He's got a hamstring injury in the Wolves. That's tough. They haven't really been in that position because he's, by and large, been one of the more durable players in the league, right? And he's their best player.
Right.
Now, I mean, I guess offensively, right, you still have some other guys you can play through, right? You just kind of scale up Randall, you scale up Nas Reed off the bench, you scale up maybe DiVincenzo gets more shots, Jaden McDaniels gets more shots, but it's tough, right? Because again, you don't have a lot of high level ball handlers, high level creators, passers, playmakers on that team, and that's kind of one of the weaknesses of it. And again, it would be great if you had, a Rob Dillingham type of appearance, but it just hasn't really happened, right? They moved Conley back into the starting lineup because he was coming off the bench to begin the season. And even then, it's Bones Highland, it's Terrence Shannon Jr., and, we talked about it going into the season where part of Minnesota maybe being able to be elevated would be if that guy could give them something. And it really hasn't worked out, but you feel like he kind of needs to if they're going to win, games with them out. Now, in fairness, you look at their schedule, and I get the schedule, right? It's not really a lot of difficult games that are be coming up, but you never really want to be without your best player for a long stretch, and it always opens the door for, well, if somebody else gets hurt, then you're in a really tough spot because they just played the Nuggets the other night. That's a winnable game if Anthony Edwards plays. Right now, they got to play Lakers, which they have their own injury issues, but play Charlotte, you play Brooklyn, you play Utah, you play Sacramento, and it's not a crazy schedule, but it's just always harder with those guys out.
Yeah, for sure. That's a big one, right? Like that's just as big as Luka is for the Lakers in terms of the impact, right? And for a guy who has the ball in his hands that much, I agree with you. Like Rob Dillingham should be, in theory, that guy who takes offensive pressure off of him. Granted, not really a defender, probably would never be that. And I am kind of curious as to why he's not really in the lineup, I guess, or getting opportunities and whatnot. That's, I guess, more of a behind the scenes kind of thing. But at the end of the day, that's a pretty high lottery pick, and I feel like if he doesn't play, you might be dooming yourself because you traded for that guy as well. Granted, it wasn't, like a wild trade or anything like that, but it is kind of just interesting. But yeah, Ant out is definitely a big kind of deal. And a hamstring, right? Like they said, he's going to be out at least a week, right? And that's just for pretty much reevaluation. So I am curious, how that impacts Minnesota because, you do have some offensive guys on that team, but nobody who could replicate anything that Ant does.
Yeah, exactly. Just the all-around package that he's got on both ends of the floor is really difficult to. Again, that's what happens when you lose your superstar, but that's why you have other good players on your team so you can scale up. It's just like I said, once one guy goes down, that opens the door for some of these other players. But around the league, right, you have all these high-scoring games. I mean, you got Austin Reaves with 51, Lauri Markkanen the other night had 51, right? SGA had 55 earlier in the season. So it's kind of funny because offensively, you got this weird thing where I remember a couple seasons ago, I think it was the year the Celtics won the title, if I'm not mistaken, right? Where there was the stretch where the NBA changed the officiating sort of, where they kind of just made it more physical, where they kind of let people play through a lot more contact and they weren't just calling everything. And it actually changed a lot, right? Because the free throw attempts went down. People actually liked it because they felt like there's a little bit too much. There's a little bit too much that's allowed for offensive players to kind of do whatever they want. And so that kind of fixed it and helped out. And it really helped out, right, the teams where they're super physical anyways, right? Where it hurt, which the teams that it hurt were the teams that rely a lot more on, that whistle, right? Where, like, if you call a lot, we can kind of draw fouls and get to the free throw line a ton. And that's not been the case this year, right? Where, I mean, like Austin Reaves, he's good at getting to the line, right? He does, he finds ways to get to the free throw line, right? Not always in, a great manner, but like just as a whole, he can get to the free throw line a ton. But just in general, it's just such a stark change from what it was a couple seasons ago. And it felt like it was kind of better, right, at that point where it feels like too many guys are going to the free throw line. And some of these games are way too long. Like the Oklahoma City-Indiana game. I mean, that game, both teams had a combined 90 free throws. That's a lot. And the game went on for, like 3 hours or so. And that's just too long. And we understand that guys will foul. There are teams that foul more than others. But it's just wild the amount of players that have been able to put up these high-scoring numbers. I mean, you got Cam Thomas had 40 the other night, right? Of course, we saw Wemby with 40, and it's a good combination of a lot of these younger guys. We've talked about the growing amount of talent in the league. It's fun to watch. Like I said, I don't necessarily love the additional free throws and whatnot, but just there's so many talented players and so many teams where they have some of these guys where they can just kind of go off at any given night in a variety of ways.
Yeah, exactly. And the league's becoming so diverse, right? Like that's the coolest part. You have guys who can, do it with finesse, power, whatever the case may be, and some of them have the whole package, right? Like look at Wemby and the development of him off of this off season, right? Like year 3 Wemby is looking scary, right? And so are the Spurs in general. Granted, it's been like what 4 games, but still a decent sample size to see what they're about, right? In terms of what they've got going offensively and defensively, right? Because that's where they make their money is their defense, and it turns into offense. But a little bit off topic, but yeah, it's just wild how many talented guys we can actually have, right? And like you got Giannis too popping off. Everybody's like I don't know. It seems like there's like a good feeling in the air about the season in terms of the performances, right? Like it seems like everybody's kind of bringing their A game if they're healthy, right? Like even when Luka was healthy, the guy was on a tear, right?
Yeah,
Wemby,
average almost 50.
Yeah, Wemby, Ant even. I know that was a weird I think first game for them because it shouldn't have been that close, but he had like 40 something, right? So
yeah.
And then you have, progression of other players as well, random guys dropping like 30 and stuff. So, and I think that does have a little bit something to do with, probably officiating slightly. But even then, I think these guys, they know what they're doing. And I just love the product right now.
Yeah. Just to kind of just move around, just kind of ask about some questions of some of these teams. Sure. Just kind of just look over, are these teams in trouble?
Okay.
Sacramento Kings 1-2 through the first couple of games, lost the game to the Lakers, right? Where no LeBron, no Luka, right? Whoever else was out.
Sure.
Gabe Vincent gets hurt in the game.
Okay.
No Jackson Hayes.
Okay.
If you want to throw them in the list, no Maxi Kleber or
Right. But I guess those guys would do something.
And gave up 51 points to Austin Reaves.
Sure.
Almost a 51-point triple-double. Defense looks pretty bad. We weren't very high on this team, but to kind of just watch it, it just feels like there's too many guys on this team that are offensive-oriented players, not enough dirty work guys, not enough guys that are willing to be high-level defenders, and it's just a weird fit. And, offensively, they got a bunch of guys who can score. But now, obviously, with Keegan Murray out, we know he's going to be out. It's another injury, right, for a while. It puts a lot of pressure and onus on some of these other guys because he is one of their better defensive players, and he just got paid, so you'd imagine his role would be super high with this team. But do you think they're in trouble?
Absolutely. And I think that's why we weren't really high on them, to begin with, really. So that's kind of the interesting part about that whole team. Because offensively, like you said, I think there are, some positives, right? You do have a guy like Zach LaVine, who I think has been having a solid season. But there's too many question marks, in between, right? They don't have, they have a lot of gaps to fill, and they didn't do too much in the offseason in that regard. We've seen this duo before. There's a reason why Chicago moved on from it, right? So, the duo of DeRozan and Zach LaVine, I just don't think that's really going to get you that far, especially in the Western Conference. In the East, maybe we could have a conversation about it, right? But in the Western Conference, the way it's currently constructed, no shot. And you have Sabonis kind of at the helm as well, who I think I would put him on the fraud watch, but yeah, I'm not too high on the Kings at all, and I don't think you were going into this. Yeah, nobody was really high on them. Okay, it's cool that you got Russ. I know they prided themselves on getting Schroeder or whatever, but I feel like if those were your home run moves in the offseason, building on top of what you had last season, you were cooked from the beginning.
Yeah. All right, so let's move on to a couple other teams that maybe a little bit more interesting to talk about, where it's not quite as obvious. Hawks and Magic.
Okay.
1-3. Both have lost. Well, the Hawks have lost 2 in a row. Magic have lost 3 in a row. Right? They played each other.
Sure.
The Hawks did win that matchup, but overall, I don't know. So far through the first 4 games, it doesn't look great. The Magic can't get stops anymore after being one of the best defensive teams in the league last year. They can still kind of score, but they still can't shoot. The 3-point percentage has not been great. There's been some struggles offensively from some of these guys. They are playing a different style. Hawks have had a couple of games where they got lit up, right? They got lit up by the Raptors in the first game. They got lit up by the Bulls in the last game I watched, right? Where it's like Josh Giddey, Trey Jones, Bucelis, right? So I don't know. These were 2 teams where I think we didn't pick them to win the East.
No.
But everybody, including ourselves, were very high on them and felt like they could be in the conference finals if weird things happen, because we know that happens literally every year. Could they be like the Pacers of last year, right? Something like that. Either of these teams, and it's only 4 games, so it's a small sample size. But from what you've seen, do you think that they're in trouble?
Yeah, it's a little different. I think you have to use a different gauge, right? Just based on the offseason, based on, these teams last year. Last year, Atlanta's main issue was really health. That's what it came down to for them. Same with Orlando, actually. Very similar situation. I think it was what Powell and Franz both had a freaking oblique injury, and then you had Jalen Suggs as well, who missed, pretty much the entire season. So, I would say for these teams, it's a little bit more of, okay, on paper they look really good in terms of the additions that they made. You would think they would be seamless, but I feel like they just haven't really gelled too well, and I don't really know what's up with that. Like with Orlando, you would think you just kind of bring in Desmond Bain and he would kind of just do his thing and add that offensive firepower that you desperately needed last year, but it's really I don't want to say destroyed their identity so far, but I think it has clouded some things on that team, and I think they'll figure it out at some point. But it might be a little bit too early to tell. Same thing with the Hawks, right? I think the additions have been, somewhat underwhelming. Granted, Trae Young has had, I think, a couple or one bad game littered in there, but defensively, they need to form that identity, I feel like, and you are easing Jalen Johnson back into the system as well, based on. And you also have Research too. Like I feel like I don't know. It's just on paper. I expected that team to probably have a hotter start than what they've had right now. But,
right.
Yeah, it is wild that they did end up beating Orlando. So
yeah, I mean, like you said, Trae Young hasn't played quite as well to begin the season. Yeah. He's had some seasons where he started off slow. I think once he plays better and gets back to his normal production, that'll probably help juice the offense, and then that can help your defense where you can get set. You don't have to always just run back because you're missing shots or turning the ball over. So I think that'll help. Orlando, kind of a similar thing. Just they weren't a good offensive team last year, but like you said, they brought in Desmond Bain. Now they have Tyus Jones. It feels like he's not done quite a ton, and maybe there's kind of a weird push-pull with him and Anthony Black just because they're both, kind of guards that play with the ball in their hands. Tyus Jones is more like a classic backup point guard, but maybe you don't really need him as much, or maybe he's just not as good. Maybe as what we kind of thought at different points. I remember when the Suns signed him, right? We were both like, "That's not a starting point guard," right? Even though we liked the signing, we're like, "Is this guy going to start, or is he coming off the bench?" And it turned out he started, and it didn't work out well. Not just him, but
some guys work better in certain systems, right? Like in Memphis, coming off the bench,
right?
Solid. Minnesota coming off the bench, solid. Washington starting, no.
Right. So. Yeah, like you said, I'm not panicking necessarily yet with those two teams, but it is kind of one of the reasons why most people felt like it's still Knicks and Cavs more than likely as the two best, because we've seen them before, especially the Knicks because they've been to the conference finals. We've seen them, and they're kind of just, and in the case of the Knicks, they're just adding on extra pieces and changing the coach. So there's a lot less that they have to deal with in terms of changing stuff versus like teams like the Hawks and the Magic. They have completely new pieces that they have to integrate. That's like you said, that's going to take time. Sometimes with some of these teams, it's quicker than others, but this one might be a little bit slower.
Absolutely, I agree.
So moving on to, I guess, one of the next teams, Dallas Mavericks, 1-3. They did get a win over the Toronto Raptors, but they lost to Oklahoma City, albeit Oklahoma City is kind of shorthanded. They didn't have Lively or Gafford in the previous game. Right? Obviously, they're still without Kyrie Irving. And it just feels like kind of this consistent theme of offensively, not great, defensively, not great either. It was like they were trying to make a comeback against Oklahoma City, but they were down by a decent amount. Maybe OKC took their foot off the gas. Looked like Dallas might have been able to come back and steal the game. They played D'Angelo Russell more, and he has played better. Cooper Flag got hurt in their last game. He didn't play very well. He had the great game against the Raptors, but this is kind of one of the things that we thought about, where one of the reasons why we weren't quite as high on them was just we felt like there might be some growing pains where it's going to take time for these guys to adjust, learning how to play together. Cooper Flag's playing point guard, which I don't think we necessarily expected.
No, not
yeah. I think we kind of assumed that D'Lo was going to be the starting point guard, and then you kind of figure out how you work around there, and
Right.
it just hasn't worked, right? And they're 1-3. They do have a major piece out, but we don't know when he's coming back. And if they want to make the playoffs and make some type of run, you're gonna have to find ways to win games with him out. But I mean, you're getting the reps in with Cooper Flag, so there's also the development thing. It's part of the two timelines issue that you have going on here. But are you worried or concerned about this team? Is it panic time?
I think I was panicking going into the season. I'm not gonna lie. I mean, like, and it really had nothing to do with like Cooper Flag. Like, I feel like we thought that there were gonna be probably some highs.
And 18.
Yeah, some highs and lows, right? Yeah, this is the youngest player in the league at the moment, right? We already know the story, reclassified, etc. But there's just problems when I think you have AD at the forefront of your offense without certain pieces that kind of make him successful, right? And obviously not having any elite backcourt defenders also hurts because you're probably going to get fried every night by very elite perimeter players. And then like I said, the growing pains with Cooper Flag, it's just going to be a culmination of things. The injuries, right? They're going to start piling up, which they already have, right? So I think we kind of foresaw that a little bit, right? I'm not going to say they're cooked, but it is panic time, I would think, because there are expectations with that team. I think they placed those expectations last year. When Luka made his departure from Dallas, but I don't know, the energy has not really been good down there. I don't think, but I mean, Flag's been okay. Like, the numbers I think are much better than they were after the first game. So, but this is the time to overreact. So, not really tripping. I know probably in about a month we'll probably be talking about this a little bit differently.
Right.
But who knows? But
yeah,
it's not. I don't know. I'll say panic time. I'll go for it.
Yeah, like usually the sky isn't falling like 4 or 5 games in, but I don't really see how it necessarily improves unless they switch the lineup, or you just wait for Kyrie to come back, and I don't know when that's happening. Right. So if one of those things doesn't happen anytime soon, then it is panic time.
Exactly.
So moving on to another team, in terms of are we concerned? The Toronto Raptors.
Okay.
1-3.
Okay.
Right. Lost 3 in a row.
Yep.
This was kind of a team where I think we thought they'd be decent. Right? Like, if we picked the over, I think we thought they'd be all right. Like, they should be a decent playoff team in the East. And I guess, if you're talking about the current quote-unquote seeding right now, they're technically 10. Right. But, I mean, of course, 4 games in, so that's not necessarily a guarantee. Emmanuel Quickley doesn't look great. Jakob Poeltl, I think, is hurt. Also doesn't look great.
Yeah.
Feel like those guys kind of need to be good, especially Quickley. We talked about that. That's a major key piece for them, because outside of that, they don't really have any other perimeter guard-oriented players. And we've kind of seen, right, like Dallas. You could even mention Houston to a lesser degree, right, where some of these teams where you don't necessarily have like an actual guard type of player, it's a struggle, right? And in the case of the Raptors, they do. And he's paid a lot of money. He just hasn't played that great. Yeah. And if he's not actually good, then this team is going to have some real issues, because after that, I mean, it's kind of slim pickings with who else you could really actually try to put out there. Right? I mean, you can't really change the lineup. To their credit, some of these other guys have played well, right? Like Ingram, Barnes, and whatnot. But it just, you need Quickly to be good. And we said that going into the season. And if he's not, then, yeah, they're in trouble.
Yeah. Center is definitely a problem for them, right? Like, I think Poeltl's okay, right? I think there's better out there. Granted, they were not likely to get better at that position at that point. But, like, there's so many things offensively going for that team, right? You have Brandon Ingram, you have a Scotty Barnes, you can even have a RJ Barrett, Grady Dick. Like, you have all these great, players, but the person that kind of brings them all together is IQ. And I feel like if he's not really playing at that, not elite level, but, above average level, then you're probably not going to do too much, even in the regular season. But I don't think it's panic time. I think it's just a matter of, a lot of things are riding on, his performance. So he's kind of got to turn it around. And once he does potentially pop off or, right the ship, then I think they'll be okay.
Yeah, I mean, and this team wasn't expected to be an upper echelon team in the East, anyways. It's not quite the same as
More of a middle
Atlanta.
tier.
Yeah, it's not quite the same as Atlanta, Orlando. I don't think Dallas was necessarily looked at as an upper echelon team, but people kind of expect them to be a good team,
Yeah.
sneaky good team. So yeah, that's a tricky one, but like you said, it's overreact time for a lot of these. And then I guess kind of one last one to touch on. The Detroit Pistons, they're 2-2,
Mhm.
so this one's a little bit different because they're 500. But they got destroyed by the Cleveland Cavaliers the other night, right? Where it was not close, it was not competitive, and I think this is a team where we kind of expected them to take a step back a little bit,
Big time, yeah.
right? Like still be like a playoff team,
Mhm.
but it's kind of the year of some of the vets are gone, some of the other kind of helpful pieces are gone, and we've kind of replaced them with stopgap guys, and then also elevating our young players, right? Like Ron Holland's playing more, wasn't really a huge part of the rotation last year, right? Duncan Robinson's in there for Malik Beasley. You don't have Beasley, don't have Hardaway Jr.
Yeah.
Right, so now you're just like I said, kind of filling the gap in there, and this is kind of what happens, right? I mean, we know that Cade's still very good, right? Asor Thompson's played really well. Duran. I mean, the thing is that to be fair, Ivy's hurt, so that's kind of the other issue as well. Maybe when he comes back, but that's kind of the question we talked about going into the season of do you extend those guys? Because in the case of Ivy, he's had some issues staying healthy. And then it wasn't even until last year, right, where he kind of took off, and we're like, oh, this actually works. This guy actually plays and fits really well next to Cade. And then with Duran, right, it's more so on the defensive end, right, where you have the questions, right? Like offensively, he's got good touch, he's a good passer, but we're still kind of wondering, like, okay, those guys didn't get their extensions going into the season, so they're going to go into this offseason entering restricted free agency, and I don't know if I've necessarily seen enough to make me feel like that they're going to give these guys a bunch of money. So this feels like one of those teams we've all talked about it where maybe they trade for a guy like a Markkanen, right? Because especially now Markkanen's playing very well, so he's probably upping his stock.
Yeah.
And kind of getting him in a point where we'll see what Utah does. Maybe they just end up being better than we think. But are you concerned about Detroit?
Yeah, because I was a little bit concerned about them going into the season, right? Like, I think for me, if you don't have like a great off-season grade from one of us, then you're probably doing something wrong. And I think Detroit really didn't do a whole lot in the off-season, and that's kind of what I was worried about. Like in that video, I specifically talked about them taking a step back. I said it's the highest I've ever been on Cade, but it's more so the surrounding talent, right? You lost out on a couple of pieces that I think not necessarily were big time for you, but definitely contributed to your regular season success. I still expect them to make the postseason. I still probably expect them to potentially get out of the first round, but that is somewhat of a step back because I don't think they're going to be as high of a seed this year,
right?
As they were last year. So yeah, I'm a little bit worried.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Like I said, we thought they'd take a step back, but it's just a matter of can they still make the playoffs? Can they still potentially win around? Because you're kind of waiting to see if those young guys take the lead.
Exactly.
Yeah. So now we'll move on to maybe some teams that are in a good spot, or maybe teams that we might have to take the L on.
Okay.
So I guess let's start off with the Philadelphia 76ers, right? I think this was a team that we picked the over on.
Okay.
But nobody really knew what to make of this team because we didn't know how healthy is Paul George going to be. He hasn't played yet. How healthy is Embiid going to be? He's playing, but he's on a minutes restriction. But the thing that was factored in, I think one of the reasons why we kind of took the over and thought they should be better is one, the health has to be better than it was last season. But two, right, you have Tyrese Maxey, who's been playing great. He's been healthy. And now you have VJ Edgecombe, who's come into the mix, and he's basically played like a star. Like he's essentially come into the league right away, and he's averaging through the first few games, it's 3 games, so it is a small sample size, 25, 6, and 6, right? That's kind of that number that we talked about, like, say, Austin Reaves, Desmond Bane, right? Like he's, playing at that level to begin the season where, especially once Embiid is out of that minutes restriction, if that happens, so hopefully it does, right? And then Paul George comes back, like, that's on paper like a good team. It changes it up a little bit, right? Because now you're a little bit older, maybe a little bit less athletic. But if you can get anything close to the Embiid that we've seen play at an MVP level, right? That's gonna make this team really good and formidable because we're still also waiting on Jared McCain. He's not played at all, right? At some point he'll come back. Quentin Grimes is coming off the bench, so you have a great guard rotation, explosive guard rotation, and then you'll have Embiid, you'll have Paul George. You don't have a lot of fours, so you don't have a lot of those in between guys that can kind of do some of the little things. Maybe Trendon Watford can do that. They've started Dominic Barlow, I think, in a couple of games. So, I mean, I think the main thing is that we expected them to be better. It was just the question was, would they be better enough that you actually have to take them seriously as a potential contender? Are we there yet?
This is the week of overreactions. I mean, they're playing like it. I have to be real, right? The duo of Maxey, the duo of Maxey and VJ Edgecombe is crazy. We talked about it last episode, right? VJ's pretty much, playing, he's a rookie third option, if you even really want to call him that, but he's playing like a freaking number one, number two. So, he's special in that regard, especially, in terms of this little stretch that he's having. Is it sustainable? I don't know, but he was picked high for a reason. And I think, he's shown, what he's capable of. But then you throw in a guy like Embiid into the mix, and like you said, just maybe half of what we are used to from him. I mean, that's still utter dominance, and I think that's going to be the key. Is I think Embiid's health, because what he brings to the table at that position. Right, they're very thin at big man, so even him being on the minutes restriction or whatever, he still gives you a little something, but. If he can find a way to get back to form a little bit, then yeah, I would say this team is probably top three in the East. No questions about it. They would probably be the runner up, I would think, to Knicks and Cleveland, right?
Yeah, that's the thing. If Embiid can actually be healthy, and part of the reason why we took the over under last year was because we felt like there's enough talent there where you should be able to win games. Even if Embiid either A, doesn't play, or B, doesn't put up monster numbers, right? Like the last time he was healthy, like as soon as he got hurt, they were done. Like they could not win games while Joel Embiid was out. Now they have a real chance because of what you're getting from the guards. And even a guy like a Kelly Oubre, right, who's like kind of sneakily been really good for Philly, the last couple of seasons, right? After kind of being a guy that had been moved around a bunch, he's kind of, fit and become comfortable in the role, right? And like, obviously Embiid, like the system revolves around him, but with all these other players, like I said, you don't have to rely on him as much from night in and night out, which is a good thing, right? Like it's a good thing that you are kind of in a spot where you can win games without him, because that's kind of the mark of a contender potentially, right? Where it's like, you shouldn't, like obviously, like say with the Mavs before they traded Luka, right? Like he averaged 34, 9, and 9, right? But like they were still capable of winning some games where he didn't put up monster numbers. Him putting up monster numbers is part of the deal, but it wasn't like if he doesn't score 40, we have no chance of winning, right? Like that's not what was happening. So that's what you want, right? And that helps him be able to kind of figure out how to manage the season and how to manage his workload, and for Philly to kind of figure all that out. So if, like I said, if he comes back and he's anything close, like that's a good team. That's a team where I'd be concerned about. Even you don't have the forwards necessarily in some areas, but you still have a lot of talent, so you can't really overlook that.
Exactly.
I guess moving on to the next one, Chicago Bulls 3-0. I believe we both took the over on them. They played pretty well through the first few games of the season. It's the first few games of the season though, but a lot of contributions from a number of different players, right? Like even with the injuries that they've had, like you got Giddey. You got Bucelis, right, that's the guy that we've talked about that we're both very high on. Just a lot of players overall. Like Trey Jones, right, kind of stepping into a spot with some of these guys out, right? So what do you think of the Bulls thus far?
Well, I think it starts with playmaking. I think with that team, there's a ton of great passers. You already mentioned pretty much all three, and I think the three main ones that really matter, right? You got Trey Jones, who could be a great connector guy, right? And you have Mataz Bucelis, who draws a lot of attention on the offensive end, but has made leaps in terms of what he's been able to read and make sense of on the court. And as well as Giddey, we already knew that he's a point guard. We know that he can run an offense as well. So I think things are starting to gel and come together for that team. Do I expect it to be sustainable? No. But do I expect them to have a much better record this year than they did last year? Absolutely. And that's kind of the logic that's as to why we did pick the over, right? And it's like, there is a level of progression that I think hasn't really been talked about in Chicago in terms of post, Levine era and stuff. Like they are focusing on the young players, and I think that's the right decision to make. And it's pretty much about time for that team in that city. So shout out to them. Like I said, do I think it's sustainable? No, but do I think they're gonna have a good record? Probably.
Yeah, through the first 3 games of the season, you got Vucevic averaging 20 and 13.
Yeah.
Offensively, 64 from the field, over 50% from three. Josh Giddey averaging 19, 6 and 9, right? Shooting over 40% from three. Trey Jones, 13 and 8, playing better than Tyus Jones now, right? Like even defensively, with the way he's averaging over 3 steals a game.
Yeah, it's wild.
I mean, the Sunmu at 17, Huselis at 13, Herter. So they got a lot of depth. I mean, even Patrick Williams, right? Not shooting the ball well from the free throw line, right? But just as a whole, just contribute. Oh, my bad. Okoro's the one who's not shooting well. But like even Patrick Williams, like you're getting a lot out of a number of different players. And like you said, probably not sustainable, where it's like they're one of the only undefeated teams. Like I don't think they're going to be an upper tier team in the East, but they seem better. It's just the problem is better enough for them to get out of that 10 spot that they've been stuck in. Where they're like somewhere around 38 or 35, 38 wins.
I think this year it will be.
Yeah, and that's kind of the question is can they actually get out of that? Because if they could take the step forward, I think if you're a Bulls fan, like you'd feel really good about that.
Very good. Yeah, because that's your new young core. Move on with that.
Yeah. So I guess another team we can mention in terms of one that possibly might have to take the L on, the Milwaukee Bucks. 2-1, right? You have a number of contributions from a number of different players, even beyond just Giannis, right? You'll have Gary Trent Jr., you'll have AJ Green, right? You got Cole Anthony, you got Miles Turner, right? Contributing on the defensive end, Portis off the bench. A lot of the Bucks fans in the comments, right, talked to us and kind of told us, like, hey guys, you can say what you want, but at the end of the day, this team is deeper. It's more athletic. You got really good three-point shooting around Giannis. It's optimized more for him because he's going to play with the ball in his hands more. He's averaging 36, 16, and 7. I didn't even mention Ryan Rollins and just overall like contributions from everybody across the board. So is this the team that we might have to admit we might have been wrong on?
I'm dying on the hill that team sucks. I'm sorry. Like I said, I love Giannis. I always think that he's going to have an MVP caliber season every single year. If you guys watch, you know that I pretty much say that every year. But I'm just not buying it. I don't think these guys are going to be able to keep it up. Granted, there are some additions who have looked really, really good, right? Especially, on the offensive end. And that's what matters. And, they're a very efficient team at the moment. But I think it'll plateau, and when it does, then our take will kind of make a little bit more sense to people. But right now, it's aging like milk. I can tell you that right now.
Yeah, I mean, Turner has, his offensive numbers have been pretty rough. So maybe you could say maybe some of those guys go down and Turner's production goes up somewhat. But it is kind of win by committee, right, on both ends of the floor. You have an athletic front line with Giannis and Miles Turner. And like I said, that's the argument that people were making. Kevin Porter Jr. got hurt, right? He was the starting guard, I think, before he got hurt. So we'll see if they can keep it up. The main thing is that I think where we could be wrong is like in terms of the over/under. We picked under. That might have just been too low. Yeah. So they could probably. So I think they could realistically win more games than that. And that was probably the mistake there. Yeah. But I don't know because and they had an issue in terms of how we framed the offseason because I think they felt like we didn't have the worst offseason, guys. Like compared to some of the other teams around the league. So
I mean, they did stretch and waive a player over 5 years. They're paying for a player that's not even on their team.
Yeah, I think it's like what we said. This is a team to watch because if they're good and they play well out of the gates and everything's fine for now, then there won't be a whole lot to say negatively, of course, right? But if they kind of struggle or let's say they get to the playoffs, things don't work out. We'll see. But for now, right, Giannis is putting up monster numbers. Yeah. And that's what you need in order to win, right? None of the other stuff matters if you need the other players to contribute. So they are. It's just like you said, can they keep it up? And, if they can't, then that's where it might get a little bit ugly. But Giannis is one of those guys where he can kind of just carry you to wins. He can put the team on his back, and they do have some some guys who can make plays on both ends of the floor. So that's the argument. Moving on to the Western Conference, couple of teams I guess we can mention. The San Antonio Spurs, 4-0 to begin the season. Wemby's looked like a top 5 player. Dylan Harper out of the gates has played fantastic off the bench. Stephon Castle, year 2 leap, still not necessarily the greatest outside shooter, but he's making the leap in terms of just watching him, in terms of his motor. Well, he already had the high motor, but like just how active he is in terms of the defensive end. Still a lot of turnovers, right? Which, in fairness, I think some of that, he's averaging 6 turnovers a game, so that's not ideal. But he's giving you 6 boards, 5 assists, right? And I think that some of that will normalize in terms of the turnovers once De'Aaron Fox comes back. But that's kind of the $1 million question, because everybody's talked about these guards are playing so well, and this was a question that people had going into the season. These guys are playing so well. These guys have been so good. Is De'Aaron Fox not even necessarily needed? And I mean, like, they just signed him to an extension. We know he's a very good player, so I would say as of right now, yes. But they're already 4-0 without him. And it's not like they played crazy great teams. Like, they played the Mavs and they destroyed them. I think that came as a surprise to most people. But then they played the Pelicans. Who else did they play the other day? The Nets, I think.
The Nets was the one where Harper had like 20.
Right. So, they haven't necessarily played crazy good teams. But the main things on the checklist that everybody's been looking for is Wemby, young guys, how do they all look? Even some of the vets, Luke Cornett has been really good for them. Just a lot of solid contributions all around the board. And were we wrong about this team? Is this team going to just cash in on the over and potentially just be a top 6 team in the Western Conference when we thought that there might be a little bit more growing pains, especially considering that there's a number of guys on the roster who aren't necessarily great outside shooters?
Yeah, that was the question. I think that's the $1 million question, was what was the jump shooting going to look like, right? And because I think we all expected Wemby to, progress as he has, through the first 2 years, and now we're in year 3. But yeah, I think we're wrong on this one. I think this is one where you have to have a little bit of foresight, and I don't think we've really seen a young team really moving like this in, since probably, I don't want to say it, but Oklahoma City. They have a lot going for them, right? You have a bunch of guys who, they gel well together, right? You add in a guy like Dylan Harper, who is great offensively, right? But doesn't hinder what they provide or what, the Spurs want to do defensively with their identity, right? Like, he's active on both ends of the floor alongside Castle, who's primarily, defensively, but he's, I think, made some, additions to his game offensively, right? Like, he's relentless when it comes to attacking the rim. And then you have Wemby as well, who's bought into that mindset of less finesse and jump shooting and more so, true skill, work, especially, for a guy at his size.
Yeah, I mean, so you look at Wemby and, you kind of talked about it already where you mentioned less finesse and, a little bit more well-balanced. You look at this season so far, he's averaging 31, 14, 5 blocks a game, a steal and a half, 3 assists. And, you're right, because last season, he, his rookie year, took 5.5 threes a game. Last season, took almost 9 threes a game in 46 games played. And then this season, he's at just under 3 a game, shooting 36%. And then from the free throw line, he's shooting 10 free throws a game, which is double the amount his rookie year. Shot 5, a little over 5 as a rookie. Shot 4 last season. So, yeah, that's a big part of the game. And it hasn't really hurt anything in terms of, like, he's taking less threes, making them at a similar percentage, which is good. Although, I mean, you'd like to make more at a higher percentage. But like you said, you're getting free throws. And he's a good free throw shooter. He's 80%.
Yep.
So, I mean, so you're kind of trading some positive, so you get some positive value out of that. Gets guys in foul trouble, makes guys have to guard them differently. Because, if he's getting to the line a lot, because last year, or previous stretches, what would they do? They would try to put their bigs on some of these other guys. Like, they put them on Sohan, they put them on, maybe one of the weaker offensive players, and then try to kind of settle for guarding him with like a wing or something like that, right? Because then it's like, well, we know you're not going to punish us inside. You're going to mainly stay out in the 3-point line, but now you can't really do that. Yeah. So what do you do? That's not necessarily, that's kind of a tough question to answer, and that's what's kind of catapulted him into that top 5, right? And we were kind of wondering, well, were all the boxes going to be checked this quickly? And so far, the answer is yes. Can they keep it up? What does it look like with De'Aaron Fox coming back, right? Because that's going to be a change, because that's a guy that's going to have the ball in his hands more. It's going to kind of change the role that these guys play. Another guy who's not like a great outside shooter, but also he's really good, right? So in my opinion, I don't think it should negatively impact them at all. It will be an adjustment. It's going to be different, but I don't necessarily think they're all of a sudden going to start losing games. But everybody knows and understands the thought process of they have all these other guards. So down the line, would they trade De'Aaron Fox? I don't know. I wouldn't be this year. Yeah. If what do they need? Yeah, like they could use some more wings for sure. They drafted Carter Bryant, but he's not going to be one of their major rotational players this season. But it's a great identity that they're building. It's just can they keep this up? The 3-point shooting doesn't become a hindrance at different points during the season, because you kind of need like a baseline level of production from there. But if you're going to get the free throw attempts, that can kind of balance things out. And obviously, Wemby's getting all those blocks and just allowing them to get out in transition. And they have so many athletes that it kind of all balances out.
Yeah, I would agree. And like you could really do a whole episode on this entire team and what they bring to the table, right? And my thing was, I thought they were going to get off to a slow start because they didn't have Fox, but I think that's honestly worked out in their favor a little bit. Just because what Dylan Harper and Stephon Castle brought to the table, and Harper's coming off the bench, and that might be the best thing for him, right? Because we already know he can be, I guess, a high volume guy, especially what we saw in college and stuff. So maybe that is a little bit better for him, because I think if he had the ball in his hands a little bit more than he does right now, we might be seeing more turnovers. Probably the worst parts of his game. But I think him being in that role of coming off the bench and commanding the second unit while also being the guy who ends up feeding Wemby half the time is pretty cool.
Yeah, 15, 5, and 5 as a rookie, right? So pretty well balanced game, and from 3, 33% from 3 on a little over 2 attempts a game. So we know that's not like a strong aspect of his game, but he's doing so many other things out there, like you said, especially now that without Fox, he does have a little bit more opportunity to play with the ball in his hands, and that's where he's going to be at his best, right? He can create off the dribble for himself and for others. And like you said, defensively, he helps too, because he's a really good athlete. He's a smart player, plays hard. So they got a really good team there. And that, like I said, that's one where I can definitely see that's one where we'll get that one wrong if Wemby stays healthy. Yeah, if he stays healthy, I think that's definitely one of the ones that we're going to get wrong for sure. And then it's just a matter of if they actually get into the top 6, there's going to have to be one of those teams that comes out. And, which team is that?
Yeah, we might get cooked.
Yeah, so after that, in terms of Western Conference teams, I guess we already kind of talked about the Warriors. So, I mean, if you want, we can kind of touch on them a little bit more, right? Just in terms of when we watch them play, like the big thing there is we already know what their record was with Jimmy Butler when they acquired him at the deadline last year. When him and Steph and Draymond play, they don't really lose, right? They've got a great record, and it's continued to grow with those guys out there, right? Obviously, now you've seen the inclusions of like Al Horford, right, which is a guy that gives them so much more, right, from a veteran perspective, big man perspective. Being able to stretch the floor and defend allows them to not have to play their other bigs as much, because I just don't necessarily think that those are guys that you want playing a ton of minutes for a serious team, because they're just not good enough, in my opinion, right? They can still help. They can help you during the regular season for sure, but I wouldn't trust guys like Trace Jackson Davis or Quentin Post as much in the postseason, just because I don't feel like they're necessarily quite there. But the Kuminga piece, right? That's the part that we've talked about, right? That's so impressive, is just the fact that he's been able to step in. He was granted the starting spot, right? After not really, being at that much of a factor during the, the preseason where like we kind of talked about, oh, his passing and playmaking's kind of been pretty solid, but he's not really doing a whole lot. But then it's kind of carried over, but in the best way in the regular season, where he's given them 18 points, 8 rebounds, 4 assists. So he's given them basically a little bit of everything, and that's kind of the best case scenario in terms of what you could ask for, because him being not just the stats guy where it's like good stats, bad team, but him actually being a winning player, that raises both the floor and the ceiling for this team a ton, because we know it's an older team. We know it's a team that doesn't have a lot of great young players, but if Kuminga can kind of become close to anything like a great young player, because he's still a young guy, right? That's going to make the Warriors even more dangerous than what there were people who felt like, because I picked the over on them because of the additions they made. I actually thought that they had a better offseason than people gave them credit for, just because of the fact that, again, we all laughed at how long it took, but it was more so how much did you actually buy into what they did last year? Was it kind of them just getting hot, taking advantage of a weak schedule, or was that team actually good? And like through the first 4 games, they're actually good, right? Like they got destroyed by Portland. Of course, you could say, well, the Denver game, it was kind of Steph bailing them out, but those were the type of games where they did not win those before they got Jimmy Butler, right? Like we talked about it many times where prior to getting him, they were not a very good team in crunch time, right? Where they would always be in crunch time games, so they were not always getting blown out, but they didn't really win a lot of them, right? Even with Steph out there, because they just didn't really have anybody who could realistically help him. And now you've got a lot more balancing out. Steph's been great to begin the season, and like I said, you toss Kuminga into that mix. Then you hope maybe some of the other guys play a little bit better. Pod just started off kind of slow, but he's not bad at all. And then you're still waiting on DeAnthony Melton, right? And you're at a point now where you kind of ask, do you even trade Kuminga? And I guess that's kind of the question, outside of talking about the Warriors start to begin the season.
Yeah, I feel like probably need to see a little bit more from Kuminga. I think to figure out if you really want to move him or not. Granted, the Warriors, like you said, have had a great start, and I think it is definitely due to the fact that they had a great offseason, and Kuminga's actually playing a role, right? He's not just kind of being a wannabe star and stuff. Like he's doing the small things like rebounding, playing defense, and obviously passing the ball as well, and that's the key, right? We talked about it in the last episode, right? If he has a season where he does what the Warriors need and want him to do, then that team is most likely going to be very dangerous, because you have a Steph, you have a Jimmy, and then you add in the other additions to the offseason as well that just make this team bigger, better defensively as well, and a little bit more versatile on the offensive end. Yeah, this team could be really, really good. It's just a matter of, health by the end of the season, and what does Kuminga look like probably by the deadline, and is there a resolution?
Yeah, and Draymond, he's already kind of on his podcast. He's already kind of mapped out the list of teams that he thinks are the only contenders in the Western Conference. He mentioned Warriors, Lakers, Clippers, Nuggets, and Thunder. Left out Minnesota, right, who was in the conference finals. Left out Houston, right, which is a team that I guess, a lot of people are pretty high on.
Yeah.
None of the other teams that he left out, I mean, I guess it's not really that much of an issue. Like, I think it's okay to not necessarily include like teams like the Spurs or the Mavericks necessarily. But what do you think? Like specifically, like even more so, maybe the teams he left off.
Yeah, I don't like that he left off Houston. I know they haven't had the greatest of starts, but I think still you have to give them a little bit of credit, because they were able to almost beat you in the first round, right? And now you add in a Kevin Durant. Granted, Van Vliet is hurt. That's the one that's kind of disheartening to me. But I mean, that list isn't too out there. I don't think.
Yeah, I mean, this is a guy who knows what he's talking about.
Right. He's in the league.
Yeah, exactly, and he's a super knowledgeable player. So I don't really have an issue with it. I think the main thing with the Lakers is they need to be healthy, and I think they probably need a little bit more of a reshuffling of some guys.
Oh yeah.
Right. I don't necessarily, but you look at the Luka piece, and if he plays the way that he's been playing before he got hurt, that can kind of make them a really dangerous team. But really, in terms of the list, I don't really have an issue with it. Like you mentioned with Houston, the Van Vliet part is the tough part, because can you get a replacement for that? The Wolves one, why do you think he left them out? because that's a team that, like I said, has been to the conference finals back-to-back years, right? Houston hasn't had the playoff success, so you can understand that one just because they don't have as many proven guys. But the Minnesota one, what do you think about why you might have left them off?
Yeah, maybe he thinks that there is like a true ceiling to them. Like I get it depends on what how he rationalized it. I don't know if he went in depth for each team or whatever, but I could understand like from the perspective of okay, they've gotten to the Western Conference Finals back to back years, but then one could say, well, so what? They don't have a title, right? Like they're not really fighting for it because they get to the Western Conference Finals, but what do they do once they get there?
And they haven't necessarily played that amazing.
Exactly. So I could see maybe from that perspective, but even then, I think those two appearances, the fact that you do have Ant-Man, I think you're always going to be a contender in that regard. Maybe you don't like some of the other pieces. Maybe you don't like a Gobert. Maybe you don't like a Julius Randle. Maybe you don't like the fact that they don't have a point guard. That might be what it is, right? And that's the two similarities, between the two teams, right? Like, yeah, you have Conley, but let's face it, right? Like he's at the end of the line in terms of his career, and then you have no point guard in Houston, so maybe that's kind of the parallel there that maybe he's kind of just trying to tell us.
Yeah, and that's a good point. Where that's kind of where I think I would probably agree with him from that perspective, because with Minnesota, like we've seen them get to the Western Conference Finals, like you said, but then they've kind of reached a ceiling where they played Dallas, and then in crunch time they couldn't match Dallas on the offensive end because they just didn't have anybody. Of course, Ant can score and get to where he wants, but even he wasn't great in the conference finals.
You can't do anything when you're tripled, man.
Right, yeah, exactly. Because he still has, because he was still improving in terms of making reads and wasn't quite at that level. And then against Oklahoma City, that's just a bad matchup, right? And that's the team, of course, that is, a little bit tough. Now, I don't think he was as high on Oklahoma City maybe as some others. And I think some of that is just because I think a lot of people were kind of wondering, this team is so young, doesn't have a ton of experience. Could they actually pull it off? And they did. And that's kind of the team that has not really been mentioned much at all, even though they're also undefeated, right? And that's with them having injuries to begin the season. So I guess kind of the final question that I would end with is, OKC with these guys being out, still finding ways to win. Granted, they haven't had the most tough schedule in the world, but do they still kind of feel like that they're the favorites most likely to come out of the Western Conference? Neither you nor I picked them, but should we be prepared to be wrong for that one?
Yeah,
does this feel like that? Oh wow, like they're winning games even with these guys out, even more so than last year when they had injuries mainly to the front court, right? So what do you think?
Yeah, I would say they kind of look like they did last year. If not, I'm not gonna say if not better, but Shea's look good, right? And the problem is, like you said, the injuries. But if they're able to find ways to win without all their guys, then I think that's pretty much a sign. Like they're gonna be good, and I think they could come out of the Western Conference, right? And I think they take the regular season, very seriously, right? Like they treat it like the playoffs. So. Yeah, I think they definitely will have a chance at coming out of the West again.
Right, and that's kind of the interesting thing is that last year they were so comfortable just blowing everybody away, right? But like the first few games that they played have actually been, well, the Dallas one, Dallas came back, so that one was a little bit different. But just as a whole, like last year they had very few games where they were down to the wire and they were in crunch time, and they actually weren't that great with them in the regular season, right? Then they had the playoff ones and they were able to kind of pull those ones out. But it's just kind of funny because, last year they were so comfortable from start to finish, just wiping teams off the floor.
Right.
But, now, they've actually been challenged somewhat more where, we kind of talked about now they're from hunter to hunted.
Pretty much.
So teams are going to try to measure up and see, what they look like. They're going to give it their best shot, right? Opening night, Houston, Oklahoma City. Right, then they play Indiana right before they had a horrible string of injuries, and then Dallas, right, where they're getting blown out and then they come back and try to take the game. So just good stuff from Oklahoma City, right? Like if you picked OKC to go back to back, early on, these are good signs. Where like they're still very much engaged. They're not kind of in the mindset of whatever, we'll forget this game. We don't really need this game X, Y, and Z or whatever. Like we still expect them to win and be at the top of the West. But these are good signs, I think, in terms of like what these guys are made of, which we kind of already knew. It's good to see it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess. Final thoughts. Indiana, Boston, are they kind of just in a world of trouble?
Yeah, I mean, I think we felt that way about Boston. Indiana, I think it's the health and injuries, obviously, but yeah, with Nemhard going down or whatever, that hurts.
Yeah, Obi Toppin, I think before we started, it was announced he's going to miss at least a month.
So there you go.
Yeah,
so those are crucial guys, who make that team, what they are, and you're already without Halliburton. So I think if guys are dropping like flies, it's not a good sign.
Yeah.
With Boston, right, things just kind of aren't really working.
Yeah, they got their first win.
Yeah.
So they're 1-3, but it's tough. That's the tough part in terms of being without some of these key guys is that like I mentioned with the Lakers at the beginning of the episode. So it's kind of full circle where once one guy's out, that kind of forces everybody else to have to do more, and then that kind of increases the odds that maybe those guys get hurt, and then you have a chain reaction. Once all those guys are out, it becomes very difficult to win. Yeah, but either way. Concludes the episode of the Off Ball Takes podcast. So let us know your thoughts. We do have a comment that I guess we'll read before we close it out, and it comes from our regular episode, and it comes from the username Latimer, right? Who said this is sick. So they're talking about our last regular episode that we had, taking that as a compliment.
Yeah.
So we appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thanks for the kind words. But if you want to leave a comment, go to @the OBT podcast on any of our socials or any of our videos. We'll read it. And kind of address it. Well, I guess actually, just for fun, we also got a poll, that we might as well address that we always do on the IG as well. And we asked the question of, is Wemby a top 5 player? And 100% said yes. So.
Yeah, I think that's right on the money. I think, he's played his way into that, through 4 games for sure. And I think he's earned it.
Yeah, so if you want to join in on any of that, like I said, go to @the OBT podcast. Continue to like and subscribe as well to help the channel grow. We appreciate all the support. Thanks for joining in with us with this live episode.